The Sedro-Woolley bank robbery occurred on the night of the 17th of October, 1914. The First National Bank of the town was entered by 5 masked men on that night, and they made their getaway with $20,000. Sedro-Woolley is a town of about 6,000 population, modern in every respect, and about 80 miles north of Seattle. All due credit should be given to Mr. Goodell, cashier of the bank, for his heroic work in defense of the bank's funds. He, anticipating the holdup, was fully prepared for it. On the 10th of October, stepping outside of the bank, he noticed several men standing in peculiar positions around the bank. They, being suspicious-looking characters and surmising that something might be afoot, he crossed the street to Mott's drugstore, there watching these men for some time. During the time that Mr. Goodell was in the drugstore across the street, one of the robbers, who was standing in front of the bank, entered and asked the cashier if he was alone, and also changed a $5 gold piece. The cashier replied that Mr. Goodell had just stepped out, but would be back in a few minutes. By this time, Mr. Goodell, becoming thoroughly suspicious, hastened across the street, arriving there just as the bandit was leaving the bank. He entered the bank, closing the safety iron gates in front of the main entrance, also the doors in the rear, and applying the burglary safety devices. Then, fearing for his fellow bankers, he left the bank from the back door, went 1 block down the street, and told them what he had seen. They, investigating, found the same men under the same conditions in front of the bank. They, being warned in time, closed their bank, therefore frustrating the supposed attempted holdups of both banks on the night of October 10th, 1914. Mr. Goodell then informed the police of the occurrence and asked for protection. The following Saturday, night preparations were made to receive the robbers. The police and deputies were stationed at both banks. Guns and ammunition were placed within the bank within easy reach of all employees. Also, in case of a running fight or the necessity of retreat, ammunition was placed in the halls and in the back room so as to be accessible at all times. The young lady stenographer who worked in the bank was forbidden to return, but the men were at their places, also the cashier. On the 17th of October, 1914, 1 week after their first attempt, the bandits successfully entered, robbed the bank, and made a clean getaway. View of the main street of Sedro-Woolley, the picture of the First National Bank of Sedro-Woolley. The bank being situated on the northeast corner and the building containing also the Wixon Hotel and pool room. A street scene of Sedro-Woolley taken at night showing the situation of the lights at the time of the robbery. Later, the lights being put out left the robbers in the dark and the officers and citizens of Sedro-Woolley in the light, giving all possible advantage to the robbers. This is Mr. Carolyn, who was wounded in the leg while crossing the street by a bullet from one of the bandits after becoming a deputy, and was very active in the final capture of the robbers. Officer Jasper Holdman of Sedro-Woolley. Chief of Police Beebe. Officer Beebe was armed with a .38 automatic rifle, was stationed at the other bank. When the firing started, he attempted to advance up the street. Finding that impossible, he went into an alley by the Vienna Bakery, emptying his rifle and his revolver at the bandits. Several shots making holes, breaking windows in the close vicinity of where Officer Beebe stood, showing the attempt that the bandits made to get this officer. Officer Vailnuff of Sedro-Woolley. This officer, being stationed at the bank, was the driver across the street, hiding directly behind Mr. Mott's drugstore. He also emptied his rifle and revolver at the bandits. Marks on the side of the bank shows where his shots took effect after emptying his rifle. While returning to the police station for more ammunition, the robbery was completed and the bandits took shelter in the tall timber. The entire time consumed in the shooting of the bank and the robbing of it was not over 5 minutes. Father, mother, and sisters of little Melvin Wilson, who lost his life on the night of October the 17th. Little Melvin Wilson, the boy, was shot dead by one of the bullets of the bandits. Little Melvin Wilson, at the time the robbery started, was at his home directly across the street. Hearing the shots, he said to his mother, "Oh, Mama, hear the shooting!" And not even stopping to get his hat, he rushed out, and his mother, seeing him go out the door, little thought it would be the last time she would ever see her little son alive, rushing across the street with all the vigor and life that youth has. Little Melvin Wilson crossed the street to the railroad track, still thinking that it was merely sport. He started toward the bank when a bullet from one of the bandits' guns stopped his young career. Melvin was a very bright young fellow, about 7 years of age, just starting to school and just commencing to know what life was, but receiving the usual fate of an innocent bystander. Spot showing where Melvin Wilson was shot. Mr. Goodell, the cashier of the bank, was brave and plucky, and fought until he was cornered, but finally had to open the vaults. Mr. Frank LeBold, the bookkeeper of the First National Bank, who was sitting on a stool at his work, with a gun in easy reach when the robbery occurred, but was unable to use it. Mr. J. Mardson, the assistant cashier, showing a bullet hole in his coat through which a bullet had passed. Sheriff Thomas of Whatcom County, who followed the bandits from the robbery of the bank to their final capture. Sheriff Wells of Skagit County, who was in Sedro-Woolley an hour after the robbery occurred, and who never left the scene until the capture of the bandits. Mr. Brock Jr., Deputy of Bellingham. Mr. Barney Hanson of Blaine, deputized for the reason that he knew every foot of the roads and the trails around the international border. Maurice Dean, electrician of Blaine, who arranged the light on the railroad bridge at Ferndale. Showing the method of the robbers used in entering and shooting up the bank, they entered from the front door with Colt automatic revolvers, firing one covering the assistant cashier and bookkeeper, two of them going directly to the teller's window where Goodell stood. He, seeing them come in, got his gun and returned their fire. They ducked down beneath the counter where the bandits shot through it, with the intent to cripple the cashier. Where several shots were fired through this partition at the cashier. 52 shots were fired from the interior of the bank after their guns were emptied. Another bandit entered from the rear, breaking open the back door, covering the officers with his guns, forcing the cashier, bookkeeper, and assistant cashier into the back room where they all gathered at the vault. Mr. Goodell attempted to convince the robbers that it was a time lock. They answered him that they knew better and that he had better open it up damn quick. Therefore, forcing Mr. Goodell to open the vault and pass out the bags containing the money. They received the bags, slit them open, discarding those containing silver, while those containing gold were placed under the arm of each robber. There being only 4 bags of gold, the 5th man took 1 bag of silver. Showing the bags cut open by the robbers, and separating the gold from the silver, then passing through the back door of the bank out into the night, 1 man covering the men inside the bank from the rear until the other 4 were safely away. Side view of the bank, showing a telephone pole at the rear of the bank directly across the street from the rear of Mr. Mott's drugstore, by which one of the bandits stood. 11 clips were found on the ground. Each clip had contained 9 cartridges, showing that 99 shots had been fired from this place. Showing destruction of big plate glass in the front of the bank. Showing destruction of the windows at close range. Back of chair with bullet lodged in same. View showing broken glass door in President Wixon's private office. Showing windows of the Union Mercantile Company directly across the street, which was completely destroyed during the battle. Over $300 damage was done to the store. Mr. Jack Barrick, clerk of the Union Mercantile, standing in the exact position as he was on the night of the robbery, showing the bullet hole a few inches from his head, driving him inside. Showing another shot taken at Jack while getting into the store. Showing damage done to President Wixon's $3,000 car. Showing damage done to the hardware store opposite the bank. The window of a private residence, through which a bullet passed, lodging in a picture frame which barely missed the mistress of the house. Bullet holes in concrete outside the bank where officers attempted to get the bandits. Back door which the leader bandit kicked in to give assistance to his comrades. The back street down which the bandits took after making their haul, passing out over this railroad, which at that time was under construction but since has been completed. At that time there were over 400 men working on this road. 4 miles down the road they entered the forest, this forest being dense and impenetrable, to where the camp was located. Their camp consisted of a natural abode, protected from all sides by windfalls, showing smooth places on the logs where they had slid over them in coming and going from the camp, and showing the camp had been inhabited. Between the logs was covered with dry moss, the farther end covered with small windfalls where they slept. These black places show where they had their fires. Lookout tree, showing the seat at the base of the tree, where a constant lookout was kept upon the railroad, twigs being broken away for about 300 yards, so this view could be obtained. This camp was accidentally found by a hunter who immediately reported it to the police. The police going to this camp found evidence and maps to the effect that they had probably been there 4 or 5 weeks, and that their intention was to rob both banks the same night. The robbers entered the bank on Saturday night of the 17th of October, dividing the money, formulating their plans, making ready for a final retreat. They remained there until Monday night, then all taking the GNRR directly north with intent to enter British Columbia. A farmer reporting this fact to the police some time later, he having his attention called to the fact by a barking dog. Tom L. Wyckoff, U.S. Immigrant Inspector, stationed at Ferndale, Washington. He, making a train in the course of his duties in the small hours of the morning, and after leaving the station, hearing a dog bark very furiously on the road a few yards away, went to investigate. There he saw 5 men, about 5 or 6 feet apart, coming single file down the road, stepping in between the second and third man. He asked them where they were going. The reply was, "We know we are going," at the same time gathering around him. He then tried to arrest them, but was immediately covered with 5 automatic revolvers. He at the same time tried to pull his gun, which was caught in his pocket. They, noticing this, told him to beat it, which he says he immediately did, going to the hotel with his shotgun, left immediately on their trail, notifying the authorities of what he had seen. Showing the road which they took passing through Blaine, the old and new Great Northern Railroad. A view showing where they passed through Blaine. View showing where the robbers passed through Blaine, ducking under the electric light in a crouching position, about 20 feet apart, as seen by Deputy Philip Schaefer, who reported them to officers in Blaine, who attempted to head them off before they got into Canada, but it was too late. Showing scene on the Great Northern Railroad that robbers took just before crossing the boundary line. Douglas Station at boundary line, where deputies Hyde and McDonald were stationed, but owing to the darkness and the precaution which the bandits took, they got by the deputies before being noticed. The signal alarm was given by firing 6 shots in quick succession, thereby warning all the deputies on both sides that the bandits had passed into Canada. A view of deputies Hyde and Frank McDonald. Looking east on the boundary line, about 2 miles in the distance from the Douglas Station, lies the Old Chinese or Smuggler's Trail. This vicinity was heavily guarded by sheriffs and deputies on this night. Seen on the old Great Northern line, where the first bloody battle took place, resulting in the loss of 3 lives and 2 wounded. Great Northern Detective Keefe, U.S. Immigrant Inspector Burke of Blaine, and Canadian Immigration Officer Clifford Adams, who were guarding the road a short distance away, heard the shots and determined to meet the robbers on the railroad crossing. Where the deputies were stationed, it was about a mile from the crossing where the bandits crossed the line. It was over 2 miles to the same crossing. The deputies in making the journey took their time, thinking they had plenty of time to get there, hide and rest themselves before the bandits would have time to reach there. The bandits beat them and were already hidden by the time they arrived. The deputies arrived at the crossing, walking up to the railroad, which was about 6 feet in the air, and looking for a good place to hide. Flashing their flashlight along the left side of the road, finding that not satisfactory, they flashed it on the right, and the light flashed into the faces and the guns of the 5 bandits, who immediately fired a volley of shots. During the shooting that took place, Detective Keefe was shot in the right hand, thus disabling him from further shooting. 3 shots were fired from the revolver of Clifford Adams when he was silenced by one of the bullets from the bandits' guns forever. U.S. Inspector Burke, after emptying his revolver, called to his companions but not getting a reply, hastily retreated for more help. Burke was shot through the hat, just grazing his skull. Thicket where robbers concealed themselves before the battle. Spot showing where the pock-marked bandit was found dead. A good view of the pock-marked bandit. Spot showing Great Northern Detective Keefe after being wounded in the hand. This shows where Clifford Adams fell after being shot through the heart. Clifford Adams, the very promising young man in the Immigration Service of Canada, a good, clean man in every way, well liked by his associates, a brave and fearless man as ever worked for any government. He gave his life in the performance of his duty. This spot shows where the second bandit was found, wounded 1/4 of a mile from the scene of the battle, shot once through the hip at the battle at the railroad crossing, and later was shot in the head by one of his fellow men, when unable to keep up with him any longer. He lived 36 hours after being found. View of the bandit who was shot by his pals. Turning the camera around and standing on the track where the first battle took place, in about 35 feet distance, is where 6 years ago Mrs. Morrison was murdered by a mulatto who escaped after being caught, convicted, was hung in New Westminster, British Columbia. The bodies of the bandits to the jail at Cloverdale, British Columbia. A group of U.S. and Canadian officers in front of the jail at Cloverdale, British Columbia. Bullets, clips, and cartridges, watch and chain that was taken from the bandits. By noticing very closely, you will notice that the charm on the watch chain is a miniature revolver, thus showing you in what way their mind ran. Burning the clothes of the bandits at Cloverdale, British Columbia. Deputies from the United States guarding the highways near Cloverdale, British Columbia. Hat showing bullet holes. This hat was worn by U.S. Inspector Burke, which shows the narrow escape he had from losing his life. Showing how they guarded every fence corner and by trail. U.S. and Canadian deputies with bloodhounds searching the forest for the bandits' trail. Sheriff Wells and his automobile that were hot on the bandits' trail from start to finish. The light of this automobile was once used at Ferndale to light the bridge over which the bandits tried to pass. Showing how skid roads and highways were guarded on the day after the shooting near Hazelmere, British Columbia. A group of deputies that were on the bandits' trail under Sheriff Wells of Skagit County, reading from left to right, Bradley, Jack Taylor, Game Warden Elkins, and Charlie Stevenson. Showing the route which the bandits took in returning to the United States, passing through the old Chinese or smugglers' trail, which was so heavily guarded the night before, but was clear the following day. This gives a good view of the old Chinese or smugglers' trail. Powder House near Blaine, where bandits stopped overnight. The home of Mrs. Murray, the house where the men stopped after fatigue and hunger had forced them to show themselves to civilization. Rapping at the door of Mrs. Murray, she answered. They asked for food, but not having any meat in the house, she gave them 6 loaves of bread and 2 rolls of butter. Then, telling her to go into the house and warning her not to come out until 12 o'clock. This taking place at 8 o'clock in the morning, she stayed in the house until 11 o'clock. Then became so frightened, she rushed to where her husband was working, a mile from the house, and informed him of the occurrence. He suspected that they were the bandits and immediately contacted the authorities. View of Mrs. Murray, the kind lady who fed the bandits. Farmer McGee, who saw and talked to the bandits, he leaving the field to go to the house for his noonday meal, noticing 3 men coming down the road. He lingered at his gate to have a talk with them, but they wished to also talk with him, stopped and asked the way to Custer, carrying on an ordinary conversation for at least 5 minutes. All this time, Farmer McGee was closely scrutinizing their countenance, dress, and appearance, and coming to the conclusion that they were the bandits, notified the authorities. Farmer McGee and his boys showing the road they took after leaving McGee's farms. Mr. McGee is a highly respected colored gentleman, having lived in the vicinity of Blaine for some years. Previous to his residence in Blaine, he was a U.S. Deputy Marshal for 9 years in Mobile County, Alabama. Deputy Roselle, who took a very important role in the capture of the bandits at Ferndale. Deputy Conklin, who was also very prominent in the capture of the bandits at Ferndale. A close view of Deputy Roselle. Bridge crossing at the river at Ferndale, were Mr. Wells and his deputies being stationed on each side of the river. A view of the railroad bridge a few yards further up the river, guarded by Sheriff Thomas, Deputy Sheriff Stewart, and others from Whatcom County. The shed where the men stood at least 1 or 2 hours previous to their attempt to cross the railroad bridge. A view of the bridge taken from the spot where they stood. 2 deputies were stationed here on each side of the railroad, but on account of the fatigue they left their post at about 11:30 p.m. A light had been placed on the other end of the bridge, taken from Mr. Wells' automobile, and connected with dry cell batteries so that it would flood the bridge with light, the light being on the side of the officers on the other. Showing the place where the deputy stood to work on the light, while one of the detectives was moving around, he accidentally stepped in a puddle of water, and it being very cold, asked one of the other men to take him inside to the condenser to get dry. The bandits, watching from the other side, seeing the 2 men leave the bridge and enter the condenser, immediately tried to cross the bridge, crawling on their hands and knees. They had reached within about 20 feet of the other side when discovered. They were promptly ordered to halt. Failing to obey, they were given one more chance. Halt! Bang, 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 bang! Showing one of the bandits killed, a charge of a buckshot entering his side and coming through his breast. Showing the other bandit who was shot in the head with a charge of buckshot also, but still lived an hour and 20 minutes after. This man was a most perfect muscled man. His muscles on his body, as you can see, large and numerous, his physical strength being equal to 6 ordinary men. Showing the spot where the 2 bandits fell about 10 feet apart, the tallest being in the lead, spot showing the stains of blood. Showing the street down which the bandit passed who made his escape. The citizens of Ferndale, hearing the shots, rushed to the scene of the battle, not noticing this one man running in the opposite direction, dozens of them passing him but not thinking about it all the time. It was afterward being brought to them strongly that there could be but one reason why a man should be running in the opposite direction. This man escaped, and as far as is known, has not been seen since. The wages of sin is death. Here we see the graves of 4 men who gave their lives in a desperate attempt to steal the gold of others. We sometimes think when we read the stories of the deeds of desperados that they were heroes, but we are entirely mistaken. These men, in using brute force, steal the gold of orphans and widows, an useless killing of men for which they gave their lives. It is not an act of heroism or even bravery, but merely the attempt of ignorance and lust of men. They are not even considered men by men, but a menace to society, to be hunted and killed whenever seen. Each one of these 4 graves in that lonely woods contained the body of a man who has a mother, brother, and sisters who have probably lived under the same environments as you and I, having the same chance of honest livelihood, and with the same opportunity, but they have failed to embrace them. That is why it is necessary for you and I and all men to form ourselves into a society to destroy those who will not abide by the law. Each one of these men lying there probably has in the far-off Austria a mother who is anxiously waiting for a letter that will never come. Mothers and fathers, see that your young boys know the stories of desperados and heroes. Show them as it really is, the awful results. Even this, though the small ones, the tragedy is great and the moral lesson is far-reaching. Teach your boys means and ways of an honest living. Teach them the awfulness of crime, so that the very thought of anything but what is not just right is fear to them. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of one of the most sensational bank robberies on the Pacific coast. We hope that you have enjoyed and also derived some benefit therefrom.